Hi, I'm Allison Rose with Flick Direct. How are you today, Axel?
Hi, I'm very well. How are you doing?
I'm great. Tell me what your fascination is with horror.
It's a good, I guess that I've
Yeah.
brought that question upon myself. Um, I've always been obsessed with horror, even as a kid, like even before, long before I discovered there was such a thing as horror movies. The fact that there were Disney cartoons that had ghosts and that had skeletons was enough for me. That was just awesome. And as a little kid, I grew up in Belgium. So I
Mhm.
didn't know what Halloween was, but I can tell you that
Oh.
the day I discovered it blew my freaking mind. And there's a holiday that's dedicated to this thing that I'm into. And it's just, I think that um I I was the kind of kid who once she discovered what death and age meant, um couldn't get past it. I think some kids um somehow a therapist once told me that every child goes through a stage where they understand it, and then usually they get reassured somehow, and whether it's their parents or something reassures them, and sometimes it just doesn't happen, and in my case I guess it didn't. And the way that I think, rationalizing, looking back, I think that's why I got so fascinated by horror, because it felt like it was a comforting place to be. It felt like, if I'm going to be gone, or if my mom is going to be gone, like at least she might just be a ghost. Silly as it may sound, it's just like that's better than thinking that there's nothing. And yeah, that's a slightly sadder explanation for why I love all things spooky.
So, do you prefer kind of happy horror or psychological horror as opposed to like the gore and guts, or does it all? It doesn't matter.
I love it all. Love it all. And it goes through phases. When I was a teenager, the guts and gore were the best thing in the world, and like the Evil Dead 2 kind of horror. And then now I'm less into that. And I've mostly been into ghost stories for the last like 10 years, ghosts and witches and
Okay.
kind of that more classical side of the supernatural. But I love, you know, 60s movies and Universal monsters. And like, it's all great.
That's fun. Uh, so, where did the idea for the manor come from then? Was there something brewing in your back of your mind or your life that happened that brought
Yeah,
this
I
idea
think
forward?
it's partly what I was saying about being a kid who was trying to process those ideas and those themes of aging and those kind of more difficult things to deal with, and and then seeing the reality of it happen. Getting older, seeing my family get older, seeing my loved ones start being moved to nursing homes, and the impact that it had on me.
Mm.
And again, I dealt with it the way that I know, which is by telling supernatural stories. So it that was the basis of it. And then it also felt like there was something about nursing homes and about the way that we treat people of a certain age and the way that we take away their agency, whether it's for their own good or not. It's disturbing. There's something about it that's just kind of, that's the scary part of aging, I find.
Mhm.
And so I wanted to tell this story of this woman who decides to move into a nursing home. She wants to stay in control of her life. She doesn't want to be a burden to other people, and then everything is stripped away from her. And again, it sounds like it's a very depressing movie, but I just want to make sure that people realize that it's not. This is not. This is why there's monsters and supernatural things and little surprises in the movie that are supposed to make this a fun mystery to watch.
Yeah, and it's not really gore and guts. It's really more the psychological aspect. Is
Mm-hmm.
Judith based on anyone particular in your life or a mishmash of people, or did she just come out of your imagination completely?
She's, I think the basic idea was more someone that I just came up with
Mm.
and that I wanted to see. I think it's remarkably hard to imagine how we will be when we get older. And when you project yourself in the future, it's really hard to imagine what kind of person it will be. And I think that's very telling. I think that means that there's something about us that stops us from confronting that. But I wanted to try to think like, who's the kind of person I want to turn out to be? I would like to be someone like Judith. I would love that. I would love to be someone who's still, who's funny, who's charismatic, who doesn't take any shit from people, who's just, has her own opinions, has a strong voice. She's strong, but she also has this very vulnerable side to her.
Mm.
And all those things felt, she kind of came together very much from those feelings. I'm very close friends with Lynn Shay, who is, she was in Insidious. She's just such an icon, and she's wonderful. But she's also one of the most hilarious people I know. And so I did take some inspiration from the way she speaks. I know that Judith uses the F word quite a bit.
Yes.
And a lot of people who read the script were like, that's not the way that older people speak. And Lynn was like in her early 70s. And I told her that, and she was like, and how the fuck do they think I speak?
There's a stereotypical view of,
it's like,
the bitter old grandma, grandpa kind of thing. And
it
Judith
doesn't make any sense.
Like that.
It's like, please tell me at what age I'm supposed to start wearing flowery dresses and ask people if they want cookies and scones. Like, it's never going to be me. I'm not that little granny. So it's just like, it's so bizarre that we have this idea that at some point something switches in your head and all the F words become something else. I don't know. I don't get it. But yet it was that idea of being a continuation of someone fun, someone you want to hang out with, a grandma you want to hang out with. And I'm saying that because that's how I built the relationship with the kid as well. It's just, I wanted it to be something where he doesn't hang out with his grandma just because of the family link. He hangs out with her because she's genuinely someone has an understanding of who he is and is hilarious.
Yeah, it's not a chore for him. It's a joy.
Yeah,
in a sense.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about the younger cast and the juxtaposition between the older members of the cast and the younger members of the cast. Why was it important to show those two different sides?
Well, I think that grounding Judith in a relationship, so she's not an isolated character and she's not just somebody who's on her own, felt like it was a good way of showing who she is and where she comes from the beginning. Having that link with the outside, her grandson being very strong and being slowly stripped away from her, was a nice way also of showing the progression of what she's doing. Mm-hmm. And then the slightly more kind of stone cold reality of it is that try to sell a movie that doesn't have a single character under 70. It's very hard. So the part of the grandson was probably a little bit smaller at the beginning and then expanded. To be honest, it's the one that I found the hardest to write.
Really?
For some reason, I thought that the voices of those older people were easier to find. He read very young at first. And so I had to do a lot of adjustments to try to be like, how did I speak when I was 17? God, that's rough.
Yeah. So you not only wrote but directed this movie as well. So what was that experience like for you? How did your vision change throughout the process?
Right. I love writing and directing both, but directing I think is my great love. Don't tell writing. But I've always felt like I was. Yes, it's between us. I've always felt like I'm writing as a means to an end. Writing is just to have a thing that is personal and is mine that I can actually put on screen. And then the fun starts when I can put together a little picture reference book and have, I'm very visual led. Okay. Although I will have ideas of the soundscape and the kind of maybe music and some of the specific sounds I had in mind very clearly. It's always easier to be very driven by visuals for me. And so it's kind of coming up with those images. And the reality of it was also, I wrote this thinking this would be shot in place that has a lot of trees and a lot of forests. And we shot it in LA. So that made it change a lot. I think it would have been a very different movie if I'd got to shoot it in England or even in Oregon or Northern California or something like that. But obviously when you find a producer, sometimes it comes with certain parameters, and one of them was it's either going to be shot in LA or it's going to be shot in New Orleans. So and LA seemed easier to cast in for this specific project. So so that meant a few adjustments, a few of the scenes that sometimes writer Axelle is an absolute bitch to director Axelle and writes things that are just impossible to put on screen. So that was another thing we had to try to adjust a little bit. I'm getting better at that. I think.
Okay.